So next we have the amazing Fiona Love. She has just started as the General Manager of Workforce Development with the Australasian Railway Association. She started in this new role recently, so please join me in congratulating her today as well. Her leadership journey in the rail industry actually began in 1996, where she joined State Rail as the Senior Education Leader. 9 years in rail, she then transitioned to Sydney Ferries as the Director of Training and Development, where she's been responsible for driving the development of some very key operational and safety capabilities. She took an executive role in Transport for New South Wales in 2012 and has worked over the following 8 years to transform both operational and engineering training in the rail industry, and she also led the diversity and inclusion team. The data surrounding diversity in many areas of the transport industry do not tell a very positive story. Her experience included working with recruiters to ensure women, Indigenous, and culturally diverse applications were visible for all roles, identifying areas of discrimination, eliminating them so they were unable to negatively impact the career path for particular cohorts such as women, and it's been a feature of Fiona's work for a very long time. Please welcome Fiona, who will be presenting her topic today on strategic solutions for women in non-traditional industries. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you today. And I've been, the last two speakers, Lisa, very interesting to hear some of the synergies between what I would want to talk to you about and what you've talked about, particularly that word challenge. I've been working I worked out 50 years now. I started working when I was 15, part-time in a jean shop. So that will tell you how old I am. And it's been a very interesting journey. As a only child in a single parent family with a mother, I recall very much the discrimination against my mother in legal terms, in terms of, being unable in the 60s without a man's signature to be able to borrow money, to buy houses. There's the structural discrimination around women really most of my life. There have been significant improvements as well, but there are still some massive and significant challenges. And those statistics we heard at the beginning of the session are, the truth is in the data, unfortunately. But I have very much enjoyed my time in the transport industry more broadly, rail and maritime in particular, and I've very much enjoyed the opportunity I've had over many years to work with some fantastic women and men and to observe and learn from the experiences I've had of the leaders I have worked with over that time. And I think, if you think about the bell curve in an exam, I've had full bell curve. I've had absolutely inspiring leaders, women and men, and some of the worst leaders I can imagine I've experienced, also men particularly, but also women. I think whenever you don't get that sort of critical mass, or you have sort of a huge critical mass on one hand, which typically is men in leadership in the transport industry, you're going to get those sort of hit and miss imbalances in leadership style. But I've learned a lot over the years, like again Lisa's talk demonstrated. Women are typically and often found in what you might think of as the sort of more support areas of HR or legal or policy, finance. Certainly in transport, people and culture have dominated. Women dominate strongly in those sorts of areas. But when you get into the more operational, engineering, even a customer service roles, at some levels, let's first of all talk about engineering and operational roles. Those are predominantly filled with men. And when you get up into the executive, certainly when I left Transport for New South Wales in October last year, in the executive group in engineering and maintenance and Sydney Trains, there was not one female sitting around that table. Now, that goes down the chain to the fact that there's probably less, although I'm not sure that's the case anymore, but there are traditionally many less women undertaking engineering courses and relevant programs of study that might underpin their knowledge and competency base to be able to move into those roles. But there are, of course, I've had the opportunity to work with many female women engineers, and they are there, and there's no reason that they shouldn't be, if not by merit selection, which we know is a failed process for women, through some sort of targeted process to put women there to ensure a diversity. There's so much research that demonstrates that diversity is a key success factor for business. And of course, we talk a lot about the importance of innovation. And again, if you haven't got diversity, you really got one hand behind your back when it comes to trying to be innovative and then to structurally turn that innovation into fantastic solutions. So one of the things I've learned from engineers is the notion of systems thinking. And I think that helps when you're thinking about what strategically are the solutions for women. But before you can start to think about solutions, you have to really define the problem. And systems thinking, I think, gives you that opportunity to really narrow down and understand what is the problem you're dealing with. And again, if I think about an organisation like Sydney Trains, where you had a large group of Indian Australian women who were part of the customer service team, so the people you would see on stations, the people in cleaning roles, particularly cleaning rolling stock, cleaning trains when they're out of service, women. And we did some research when I was looking after diversity and inclusion, which I must say I only did for about 3 years across the whole transport cluster from 2012 to 2015, before I had to focus more fully just on technical aspects of development for people. But if you looked at that particular cohort, when you look at stations like Central Station and Town Hall and Wynyard here in Sydney, large stations, why were there no women in leadership roles in those stations? No female station managers. Why was that happening? And when you came down so the problem was there weren't any women. That was the problem definition, if you like, in customer service, which kind of it was anti-intuitive because women are often in customer service roles rather than engineering roles. But when we looked into it, in fact, the issue was that women were not being given the opportunity to relieve or act in roles in larger stations when men were on leave or long service leave. Always men were in those acting positions. So when it came to being applying for more senior roles, the women were unable to demonstrate any experience, that was sort of a prerequisite at the level required in order to move on. So once you understand that problem, you can start to say, okay, well, we're going to ensure that 50% of women at level, grade 7 are going to have an opportunity to act at these particular locations. So start to really turn the dial in terms of the structural barriers, and there often are in large organisations structural barriers to women being able to move forward in a sort of a critical mass sense, if you like, not just the single woman who's the story we can talk about, but in fact women as a cohort of talent. So systems thinking has been incredibly helpful for me, and it certainly continues to be very helpful in terms of strategic solutions, which don't always have to be big solutions. I'm finding now I've only 3 weeks today in this new role, and it's very much a national role rather than I've been, as you can see, a couple of decades in the state government. So to move into a peak industry association at a national level, it's very empowering. I feel a great sense of freedom from a lot of the constraints that you have when you work in the public sector around the degree of transparency and that you can share publicly. Whereas working in an industry association, I can see that people really value the opportunity to to have authentic discussions around what the issues might be. And of course, as I look at the supply chain and work with the supply chain and rail operators right around Australia, the role of women, the role of diversity continues to be an issue. That in every organisation, whilst there are most of the better organisations, and most of them are well-intentioned, of course, have some fantastic strategies, particularly at entry levels. A project here in Sydney, the Metro Northwest project, where we have the driverless train from Tallawong to Chatswood. That's where I think Transport for New South Wales really started to think about social procurement. So in terms of putting out contracts and designing contracts, actually designing sort of a series of social requirements into that contract. For example, requiring contractors to attract, a percentage of women into a particular role, requiring contractors to have a percentage of their workforce as apprentices or as trainees, and the very strong reporting culture around them, around their requirements to demonstrate that they are and were actually doing that. And I see now when I look at other major projects around Australia, whether it's Cross River Rail in Queensland or some of the projects that the Level Crossing Authority have done down in Victoria, there's that focus now on using procurement as a mechanism to encourage organisations to expand their diversity of population at the entry level. But the other thing I would say about that is, in working with a lot of senior leaders, there's a kind of a bias that I find somewhat offensive around the notion, particularly for our Indigenous First Nations people, that their sort of right of entry is at the labourer end, the construction end of our businesses. And I am constantly challenging people to say, well, actually, they're a talent pool at every level. They're a talent pool at the CEO level. They're a talent pool at executive director level, at general manager level. I found it very frustrating over many years, having worked with the best people I can think of, and they happen to be Indigenous people. I've seen the sort of curation of their careers by the broader biases, if you like, of an organisation. That means that whilst they're celebrated and supported, they're never actually at the executive table. They're never at the executive leadership level, and that's a nut that needs to be cracked. Organisations, apart from the fact there's obviously issues like we don't have any, well, not any, but we have very limited numbers of women on boards in Australia. We have very limited number of First Nations people in executive roles. And to that point, I could also talk about the fact that we're 26 million people in a region of over 3 billion here in Southeast Asia. And of course, in Southeast Asia, some of the best railways in the world are run. And I don't know if any of you have been on the Shikazen in Japan and in Malaysia. The railways in Southeast Asia are fantastic. And there's obviously some fantastic railways in Europe as well. But we have this, we have a situation where we have a lot of Asian Australians. Not sure of the percentage of our population, but very significant. And many people with fantastic industry experience who have come to Australia, and yet none are in executive roles that I have found around Australia sitting at the table, and yet they run some of the best railways. So I feel in this recent research that the ABC is doing, where about 71% of us think we're a racist country, I must say I must be in that 71%, because I see that I don't see the diversity of our population and the diversity of our experience, even it is specifically in relationship to a particular industry, in leadership roles. So whilst I can't solve world hunger, which has always been a frustration to me, I can challenge. And I think I enjoy challenging people, not unpleasantly, but if you go to a meeting and these men walk in and put their hand, hi mate, shaking hands, you're immediately not in that meeting in the same way that the mates are in that meeting. So I will go up to the men too and say, hi mate, and it does create a level of discomfort, which I applaud really. So, but I think when you have an opportunity to speak to senior people, if you have an opportunity to work with men in roles who are authentic and inclusive and have empathy and are intelligent, I think they quite enjoy the opportunity of being challenged and being able to take those challenges into other forums that you may not be at. But I think you can and do make a difference in doing that. And I've got some lovely stories, but recently I've met up with a woman through a simulation organisation, actually. I'm on the board of a Simulation Australasia group. Having been in rail training, simulation's been a really critical part of that. Anyway, this wonderful young woman back in the day was an executive assistant that worked with me in ferries, and I was needing to talk to the head of avionics in Thales, which is one of the supply organisations into rail, and the director of strategy there in the transport sector for Thales is the person who was the executive assistant working with me back in ferries. So to see this woman progress from that role to where she is now, and that journey that she's been on has very much been about her opportunity to work with people who gave her autonomy, gave her authority, gave her the safety to be able to navigate a path where she could make mistakes and learn from them, as all women and men do. And I think that's certainly been something I've, in the last few years, actively done, actively challenged the women in my team around what their capability is. They very much often draw a line. They've got a job, they're very happy, and they're going to stay in their job, and that's a good thing. But a role is something that you can have a huge influence on yourself. So the opportunity to sort of be creative within that role and perhaps let go of aspects but move into new parts of that role and discover yourself, things within you and capabilities with you and interests within you that you didn't know you had, is a really important part of what leaders need to do. Anyway, I think that's probably all I need to say at this point. Carla, over to you.
Thanks, Fiona. As always, we do have some of our founding members from transport, like Mark Champley, example, who know you and admire the work you've done so far. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.